Hey, what's going on, guys? I know it's been a little while since we've done anything like this, but I just want to get right into it. We're starting off a new kit bashing project between a couple of kits that you may not have expected to be bashed together, so I think it should be pretty interesting. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright guys, so here's what we're going to be working with. So this is obviously the Space Crab, which is currently in a few pieces, and we'll work on that. But basically, I've always wanted to kit bash this with some sort of kit, maybe not necessarily a Gundam, but I don't know, something. I've always wanted to use this for some kind of kit bash, and I thought it'd be just a really cool design and a lot of great details in there, so kit bashing this, would look pretty cool. And what we're going to be kit bashing it with, actually, is going to be the HG Moon Gundam. Anyway, this is an HG Moon Gundam kit that was built, not by me, but I actually bought this off of one of my Patreon supporters who was selling off some kits for cheap, and so I bought a couple just, if I thought it could be good for kit bashing purposes, and this Moon Gundam is actually going to fit quite well for that. Anyway, even though it's already built, I'm gonna have to go back and just clean up some parts, just just get it ready for paint. So there'll be some cleanup and everything required. The nice thing about the Moon Gundam, at least the parts of it that we're gonna be using for this build, there's not really any seam lines to worry about, so that's gonna be good. I'm gonna be replacing the head. This head is left over, I believe it was from the HG Jim kit, if I remember correctly. And this fits on here just fine without any modifications required. Not like it would be a very difficult modification if it did, but that's gonna fit on there just fine. So as far as the detail of the parts, making sure it kind of matches. You wouldn't want to put like a Zaku 2 head on here. It would look very strange in comparison. I think the details match pretty well. The size fits well, so I think it's a good match for a new head for this. And how we're going to use the crab pot is this is basically going to become its new arms. Now, as it is, it almost fits around the torso here like this. I basically just need to do a little bit of modification in order for this to just basically become its new arms and a backpack. So what we're going to have it be is basically essentially that the Moon Gundam, was salvaged once again. What was left of it here was then made once again using some just mechanical kind of worker mech kind of parts here for new arms. It just kind of got a generic gym type head for the head, and is just gonna be kind of like a salvaged to kind of repurposed kind of Gundam design anyway. So that's essentially going to be the plan. I think it's going to look kind of interesting when it's all said and done. Now, as far as anything else that I'm going to add to it, I'm not sure entirely yet. There will probably be a few other things that I'm going to add here and there just in between, but it should be a pretty good fit here around, and everything's just kind of falling apart though, so we'll work on that. But that's the general outline of what I want to do with this project. I think it will be pretty cool, and I have a couple of ideas of what I want to do with the color scheme, but at this point I'm not entirely sure about that, so we'll get to that much later on. For now, we just need to work on just basically getting everything of the Moon Gundam here that I do plan on using, getting this all cleaned up, and making any modifications to this that are going to be necessary, which I don't think is really going to be anything. And then obviously the main thing of getting the arms slash backpack to fit smoothly on there, and that's going to be kind of the main part of it. So if you take a look at how this is going to fit, you can see it's so close to just fitting around there. It's off by a millimeter or 2 millimeters max as far as just being able to fit on there. So easiest way would just be to file down the sides of this a little bit, about a millimeter on each side, and then it should slip right onto there. But I don't necessarily want to make the torso any narrower than it already is, because it already is pretty narrow. I mean, we're talking about a minuscule amount, but it's something making it thinner. And the other option would be to just file down the insides of this, and that would make this part thinner, and that would then be able to work on there. But I actually think we're not going to need to do either of those options, and probably the best option would be to file down this part at the back right there. If we take off these couple of armor pieces here, it'll be easier to illustrate. So in order to make this gap here wider, these pieces are basically just set in the side. So if we take this part here and file that down a bit, this entire piece will, instead of say for example being to here, we would be able to make it fit a little bit out more to there by just getting rid of this little bit at the end. I think that's going to be the best way to go. The only problem is this little bit here on the top is meant to fit up through this armor panel, which is on the top of there like that. So if we move this part out to the side, then that's not going to fit through that hole. So we could either make that hole a little bit wider out to the side so that there's space. But what I think we're going to do is just cut that part off. And actually, it's a cool detail with that being out like that, but once this armor piece is on, you don't actually see that little hole in that. It's just the top of it that you can see. So I think we can cut that off the frame part and actually set it into this part actually sticking up a little bit so that you actually do see a little bit of that eyelet part there. So that's what I'm gonna do first. Cut that part off, glue that little bit up into this, file down this side, and then we'll see if that gives us the clearance that we need. All right, so after a little bit of work, got those to fit in there. Actually, turns out that I needed to cut a little bit more out of the piece under that hook part, kind of attach it up underneath and go ahead and glue that in there, and then when it's all said and done, that'll fit on the back on top of there. And if you look at it right now, there's a little gap there in the sides that's been created by the part that I've sawed off, but that will actually allow enough movement space for these to actually be able to extend out just a little bit, which should give us the clearance that we need. So let's go ahead and put these pieces back on here. And this won't be like a movable thing. I'll just go ahead and glue these in place, but just to show you guys, the only thing that I'm also worried about is that up in here, like kind of where these like teeth part fit into that, I might need to cut that a little bit just to make sure that this can move, you know, without being too hindered. Like I said, just at least to move to the place where we need it to be, and then everything can ultimately be glued. But let's see, that should be just fine for this to then be attached onto the torso like that, and we're all good. So now we have a little bit of kind of awkward space going on here at like the bottom of that I think this will be a good place to put something else, maybe like a large fuel tank or something. And I think we can probably modify this to make it look like those cables are just plugging right directly into the back skirt, because they kind of line up pretty well with that already. So I think we can add a little something there. That should be easy enough. And I think, yeah, this empty space right here just is perfect just for like a big fuel tank essentially. Maybe just go ahead and do a little bit kind of more cleanup work, gluing some of these parts just so that it's not constantly falling apart as we're trying to get it all put together here, and a little bit more cleanup on this guy, and we'll come back and get to kind of the attachment portion of that. The next main thing that I want to sort out is basically just getting the backpack connected onto the back, so then we can kind of work on everything more from there. We have to actually have to be able to be connected, so I don't have to hold it on there every time we're trying to check it out. Now, the main thing that's getting in the way is that this part is hitting the back skirt. So for right now, we're going to take off the back skirt just so that we can sort out the connection here between the back. And what I want to do is use these two existing holes, not the center one, I'll just ignore that for now, but these two ones here on the side, they should be 3 millimeters, I can imagine. So just going to make some new pegs here, just using a piece of runner, which I'm also just going to guesstimate is 3 millimeter. Basically, we can just cut off a piece of runner, stick it in there, make sure it fits. Once those are in there, obviously don't need them to be quite that long, so I'm gonna cut these off again just so that they're somewhat straight for the next step here. In order to accurately be able to tell where these are going to touch on here, what I'm going to do is just put a little drop of paint on the H of the end of there. And it's a little bit messy, but then I have a general idea of where those are going to line up. And once those holes are drilled out there, I also cut out the kind of space in between there that was just not really necessary. There's like a pegs in between that hold that, but there's another peg here at the back that holds this top and bottom half together, so didn't need that, just to get those out of the way. It fits on here fine, and I also cut out this little space here, so this was all just some mechanical detail, and it actually like lines up perfectly with this part. So this had like a little square edge kind of going around it. I just cut that down, cut out this little space here, and that fits into there, and our backpack fits right onto here, just like that. It's a pretty good fit, so let me just go ahead and put some of these other pieces on here so we can just kind of see how everything's looking. Alright guys, so with that in place, with the backpack in place here, I'm finding that the arm connection now is sitting a little bit lower than what I want it to be. Basically, I want the edge here, it's gonna kind of be hard to hold because nothing's really gonna stay in place too well without any glue here. But basically I want this top line of this green part there to basically be in line here, if not slightly above the side of the torso. So that means that like this armhole is basically gonna be lining up with where the original hole is, which is about here. If we take that part off, well, I mean, it's pretty close, but I think I want it to be just a little bit higher anyway. So that's not gonna be too much of a problem. I think probably what I can do is take these pegs out, drill the hole a little bit higher, and just basically glue these pegs in just a little bit higher, basically one spot above where they are now. That's not too much of a problem. We can do that. But the problem is it's going to mess up our alignment a little bit of this part here at the back skirt, and I think I have an idea of basically the way that we can work around that. This part plugs into the back skirt here and then into the backpack here. Now if it's plugged all the way up into the backpack up there, then it's going to be too high to fit into the back skirt, and then it just kind of doesn't work out. So what we can do is just basically not plug that part into the backpack all the way. So it'll be going into the back skirt and then going up into the backpack just barely enough so that we can glue it there. And it'll still give the appearance that this is going up into the backpack, but it'll be like just barely touching on the backpack, and that should be fine. So I'll go ahead and make that adjustment. And the other thing that you guys may have noticed is that I cut down that little square piece in there that's on like the end of the back skirt, and that was to fit our fuel tank. So I got this as just a wave fuel tank, a couple of pieces of one anyway, so I'll have to sort out the ends of the fuel tank. I'll just make a little cap piece there for the ends of that. So it'll be fine, and this will fit here in the middle, and that'll mount in the center of the backpack up underneath there like that for a fuel tank mounted in between. So that's what we're gonna do with that. Let me go ahead and make some adjustments here and we'll figure this out. And after just a little quick adjustment there with that, is now plugs on here in a much nicer position there. I'm much more happy with that. Kind of lines up with the side of the torso much more nicely now. Basically, at the moment, what I really need to do is just kind of get everything kind of cleaned up so that I can start gluing stuff together, because it's driving me nuts not being able for like everything just falling apart constantly. So I am planning on just hand painting this kit so I can glue a lot of this together. I'm not worried about keeping everything separate so that I need to, you know, airbrush every single separate part. I'm just going to be hand brushing the whole thing. So if a lot of this is all glued together, that's fine. So that's what I'm going to work on now. For now, guys, just getting everything, kind of doing a bunch of cleanup work on this, getting rid of just mold lines and stuff like that, sanding everything so that I can just basically do some paint prep. There is going to be some more stuff that we're going to add to this, but for the time being, I just want to get everything, like the main parts, put together and solid here so that we can then build a little bit more on top of that, adding some more detailed parts and things like that, and then getting into talking about painting colors and things like that was what we're going to talk about in the next episode. So until then, guys, for now, this is off to a pretty good start, but I guess one more thing that we can just briefly touch on here about the design that I need to work on is I realized that the parts for the back of the feet are missing. So I unfortunately don't have those. So I went through a few different ideas, either like replacing the feet entirely with a different kit or kind of kit bashing. And I think what I'm going to use is these parts from a Barbatos foot for the back. Now they don't exactly fit quite right on there. So what I'm going to do is basically cut out the middle section of this and just use these side panels, glue these side panels onto the side of the feet, and then just probably use like a vent detail part or some other kind of detail part, just square in the center there, just because the width of this just doesn't quite match up right. But the style, the shape of it, I think looks pretty good for this. So I'm just gonna make some adjustments on that just to kind of fix the back of the feet. But otherwise, I'll work on that and show you how that turns out in the next part of the video. For now, guys, thanks so much for checking out part 1. We'll continue on and probably finish all the actual construction in part 2, and then from there I can basically just do all the painting and everything, and that'll be pretty much it. So for now, guys, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.